Hi everyone, and welcome to the Introduction to Functions. The objectives of this video is to give you a good introduction to the concept of what a function is. To do so, we will review procedures first, talk about what a function is then, get into what problems do functions actually solve, meaning why are we learning them, and then get into how to actually write a function. And then in subsequent video, we will go through it in a program to show you how to do it. And then of course after that, you'll give it a try. At this point, you should have a good understanding, or at least a good beginning understanding of what a procedure is, okay? Obviously, up to this point, we've been dealing with event procedures, which are triggered by an actual event against the GUI. And you also learned what a user-defined procedure is now, something that we actually define that is triggered when it is called. And you also have learned that user-defined procedures, if you're going to do these, and modularize your program should have one purpose, meaning you shouldn't calculate for 5 different things in one procedure. You should only do one thing and one thing only. Remember, the reason we're modularizing is for reuse. So if you do many things in one procedure, the ability of reusing it will be minimized. Does that make sense? When we learned about these, we also learned that we want to ensure that we manage our resources as efficiently as possible. And in doing so, we pass local variables. We don't want to lose all the benefits of using local variables versus class level variables in our program. Because once we're done with our event procedure, we want to ensure that our local variables that are out of memory, our local variables out of memory. We want to continue that as we modularize our program. Just a little FYI on the side here, that when what we pass are called arguments. So when we call a procedure, the variables within the brackets, those are called arguments when we pass them. When we receive them, in those procedures, they're actually called parameters. Why? I have no idea. That's what they call them. So what you pass is called an argument. What you receive in that signature line in the actual procedure itself are called parameters. Okay? The parameters we received are either received by ref, okay, and we receive them by ref if we want to change them. So at any point that we're going to change those, when I would say variables that we pass down, even if we pass them to another procedure, we need to receive them by ref. So if we're ever going to change them, we need to receive them by ref. So if we have a procedure that we receive, and within that procedure we actually change the contents, we need to receive them by ref. If we receive them and pass them to another procedure, okay, they need to be received by ref also, because we're changing them below the called, we would say the calling procedure. Hope that makes sense. It's really all based upon that structure chart again, kind of looking at that. By val, we only receive when we want to read the contents, okay? And so if we're not going to change them, but we're just going to use the contents in our calculations, we can receive them by val. In essence, we could very easily fix all of this and make everything by ref all through our program. And if we do that, not only can we change them, but we can also read them. We don't need to, we don't need by val at all. But there's a major inefficiency in doing this. There's a lot of overhead that goes into passing things and receiving it by ref. It's actually very, very hard. Okay, it's hard on the system, meaning there's a lot of overhead. It slows things down. So that's not something we want to do at all. We want to receive things by val when we want to read them. And the only time we should receive things by ref is only when we want to change them. It's almost the same thing as a class level variable. You can make everything a class level variable and the program would work. It's just very inefficient in regards to our resources. The by ref, doing everything by ref is hard on our processor, meaning it's going to take more processing to get everything done. Passing everything or creating everything by a class level variable just takes up memory and possibly keeping things in memory and never getting it out of memory if we ever don't close our program. Okay, so that's actually inefficient to our overall computer. We don't want to be that type of programmer. We want to use our resources efficiently as possible. To do that, you will find that many programming languages don't even support by ref. Okay, so that's another big reason here. The fact that BiRef has so much overhead, a lot of programming languages you'll find do not support it. Python, a very popular language right now, does not support BiRef for passing variables, a single variable. Yeah, you can pass an array BiRef. Many of you probably don't even know what an array is. You'll learn that in programming too. So this is not something that you know. So when we're dealing with single variables like we've been practicing up to this point, you cannot pass BiRef within other programs, other programming languages, I should say. But in Visual Basic, you can. That's what you've been doing up to this point. So what do? Well, that's what we want to talk about now. So instead of receiving variables BiRef, there's another solution. That solution is called a function. Okay? Everything we've been doing up to this point is a procedure. This other term is called a function. Okay? So a function isn't that big a difference, but in its simplest terms, a function is a procedure that returns a value. Read that real fast one more time. A function is a procedure, so it's very similar to a procedure in everything we've been doing at this point, but instead it does one unique thing. It returns a value. And I'm going to be very specific here, especially in Visual Basic. It returns a single value. Now, for the most part, in every other language out there, it returns a single value. But there are languages where you can actually return multiple values, such as Python. Again, we're not really dealing with those languages right now, but I want to give you an idea that what it is you're going to be learning in the future, things are different based upon the languages. But for sake of this particular course, and for the sake of understanding what a function is, let's stick with this simple term that says, and simple, what do you want to say, not term, but a simple explanation that a function is a procedure that returns a value, a single value. Got it? What you will find is that the term procedure is only used in visual type of programming languages. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. So Visual Basic, Visual C++, Visual C Sharp, you'll use that term procedure. When you get out of the Microsoft world, you don't use procedures anymore. You actually use the word function. Everything's a function in most other languages. Now, and with that, functions can look a little bit different. They can look very procedural-like, but for the most part, they still return a value. As I stated, every language does them a little bit differently, but what you will find in all languages is that a function is a procedure, and a function can return a value. Just said that, okay? All right. As stated, most language functions are only ways to modularize a program. So it isn't really solving a problem, but what it's really doing is just providing a way to modularize. As we started this discussion a couple weeks ago in regards to modularizing our programs, most programs that you write in the real world are always modularized. We always do this. The whole goal, once again, is to do things once, break things apart, and make it easy for reuse, makes it easy to read, makes it easy to maintain. That's our goal for modularization. So outside of Visual Studio and all the visual programming languages, we use functions to modularize everything. Within Visual Studio, we use procedures and functions to modularize everything, okay? So, what's for Visual Basic, the main purpose, the main problem that it's solving is the elimination of the need to receive a variable BiRef. Not that that's a horrible thing, but once again, some languages don't even use BiRef. So with that, it's interesting that it's important that we start learning how to deal with that. And so what we want to do, though, for Visual Basic is eliminate the need to pass things BiRef if not needed, okay? And so that's what we're going to practice here with learning how to do functions. And since as stated before, BiRef has many inefficiencies when it comes to programming. Using a function instead eliminates those inefficiencies. So that's what the problem that we're solving here with functions is eliminating those inefficiencies that we discussed before when it comes to BiRef. Okay? So why did we learn BiRef? Well, I'm kind of talking in a circle here, but I hope you understand. I wanted you to understand this important concept. So when you learn other languages and read, this language does not support BiRef, you'll know what we mean. In addition, when you take languages such as C and C Sharp or C++, you will deal with what's called pointers. And knowing ByRef and learning what ByRef is all about will make those concepts much easier to learn. We actually refer back to this class in the C class when we get to the concept of pointers. So I hope that will make things a lot easier for you by understanding this up front, what ByRef was all about. All right. So what do we mean by all of this? Well, for a procedure, as you now know, I'm kind of writing, kind of a little pseudo program here where we sit back and we say we declared a int number 1 as an integer, int number 2 as an integer, int total as an integer. I'm going to call calculate total by passing those down. In this case, I set number 1, number 2 to 10 and 15. Obviously, in your application programs, you would get that input off your GUI, of course, right? And you would validate it and then put it in there. In this case, just for sake of example, I'm going to go ahead and set it. When I call this, or when I call this, these arguments right here, int number will be 10, int number 1 will be 10, int number 2 will be 15, and my int total will be empty. We're passing this down. This is what you've been known to do now. We pass this down to receive it ByRef. So the procedure and its signature, again, this right here is the signature, would receive this data. So in this case, once again, I'm calling calculate total, and I'm going to receive public sub calculate total by val. I'm not changing int number 1. I'm just going to read it. It's going to have a 10 in there. By val, int number 2. And ByRef int total. But in this case, int total is an empty bucket in which we're going to fill. You guys now know this, correct? I'm seeing a lot. I want to make sure you're well aware of this. I know sometimes the program will allow you to not put in by val or as integer and just put in the variable. I do not recommend you doing that because I've been seeing a lot of errors in programs because now you're letting the computer determine what really should be happening. In that case, what I would highly suggest, especially in Visual Studio and Visual Basic in this course, is always ensuring you're putting by val or ByRef and the data type in which you're passing. That way you can ensure that your program will work. Like I said, lately I've been seeing students do this. It used to be that it would cause an error, a syntax error. With the newer versions of Visual Studio, I guess it's allowing you to do this. But I'm also seeing unexpected results. And number 1, number 2, I'm seeing the program bomb, abnormally end. So make sure you have both those things in your signature, by val, ByRef, and as integer or whatever the data type is. Okay? Once again, let's go through this a little bit more, though. Well, what we're doing is we're receiving int number as integer, int number 2 is integer, and ByRef as total. Again, empty bucket. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change the contents of int total. That's why we passed it ByRef, based upon number 1 plus number 2. Does that make sense? And then what will actually happen is as soon as we execute this call, and as soon as we go down and do everything, hit the end sub, it will come back, as you guys should be very well aware of now, and go to the next line past this, and int total will now be populated. Okay? If you received it by val and you did this, once again, it will allow you to do it. It won't give you a syntax error, but when you go back, it will be 0. So you need to make sure anything you change is received ByRef. Make sense? Okay, that's what we've done so far. This is not a function. Functions change this a little bit. Here's where it changes it. Note what we had here. So we got a dim, number 1, number 2, int total. Everything's the same. I set my values exactly the same. But here in this case, I'm going to pass down only int number 1 and int number 2. What we're not going to do is pass down this empty bucket. What we're going to do is call calculate total, passing these parameters down, and then the result will be passed back into what's on the left-hand side of this, the equal sign. And what other thing have we done so far that's a function? Any ideas? Is anybody screaming anything out there? Well, a couple things. We've done format currency as a function. That is an intrinsic function in Microsoft. Okay, I know we're moving on to two string now, But format currency was a function. It basically, we called format currency. We put a parameter or argument in here that basically was the number that we wanted formatted. And on the left-hand side, the equal sign, it was returned. We usually return that to our label, correct? That was an intrinsic function. Now we're writing our own. So things are a little different. We're not going to pass this down. Like we said, one of the things benefits of a function for us is to eliminate the need to receive things by ref. So this is what a function does. Now let's look at how this function is written. So instead of public sub, we'll say the word public function, okay? And so that tells Visual Basic basically that this is a function now. It's going to return something. In this case here, we're going to calculate total, same name. I'm going to receive by val my two parameters here. And then what I'm telling it is I'm going to return something that's going to be an integer. So every function, public function, should have a data type associated with it. It will be the data type that's returned and put on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And what I'm going to do in this case, and I'm going to show you in the next video, different ways of writing functions. There could be a lot of code in here based upon what we're doing, but in this case, I'm going to return the sum of number 1 and number 2. And what it will actually do is take 10 plus 15 in this case, that's what I set it to, and return 25. One thing you will learn is that you must have a return in a function. That's not for every programming language, but it is for Visual Basic. So every time you write a function, you must have the word return there, and that return should be should be in your function and based upon what you're returning. You can return a single variable. You can return a calculation like this, which is going to return that variable, right? And so on. Again, the function is going to return whatever you say it's going to return. In this case, as an integer. Could be a double, could be whatever, back to where it was called, and the total now will be placed right here. So after this is ran, and it goes here, and it returns it, it will come back, and once again, 25 will be an INT total. What did we just do? As you see, we did not receive anything by ref. We eliminated the need to pass down an empty bucket and populate it. All we did now is take the variables, do the calculation, and return the answer. Does that make sense? And that's what's called a function. Okay? All right, so in the end, a function is just another way of solving a problem, but it does it at a little bit more efficiently than doing by ref. All right, and then what we'll do is look at the next video. We'll kind of go in some different examples of functions and how we can incorporate them into existing programs we've already written, and just recognize what you need to do. So what would you do with this? Well, when you're writing your modules program, you would determine what my module is doing. If it's doing calculations and it's going to return something, or instead of passing stuff down by ref, what you'll do now is you'll recognize I can actually make this a function and return back the answer, thus eliminating the need to pass things by ref, thus having a more efficient program, and thus learning really how other programming languages actually do it. Okay?